You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com to see the many different shirts we offer, just like this great Roberto Guerrero 1992 pole winner shirt I have on. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAteer. Other co-host, you may have seen him walking out of a great clubs with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is Scott Bowie. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good, Aaron. How are you? And that is a fine Roberto Guerrero t-shirt you got on, and very appropriate for today.
It is, because surprisingly enough, our guest is Roberto Guerrero. Great episode. Before we talk about that and about some events that have occurred during the past week, I just want to, thank everyone for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else our podcast can be found.
Yeah, I agree. Please subscribe if you're not already. I see the Paul Page episode and the Jagger Jones episode are in a heated race to 200 views, which is cool. And I've noticed that some of the views on the other ones are going up. Anybody that's tuning into this one that may have not heard us before, please go back and listen to some of our archive. We've got some really good guests. And last week's guest, Jimmy Kite, I mean, that was a great talk, I felt. And if you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen to that. Jimmy is a great guest, and but all of our guests have been great. So if you haven't heard the other ones, please go listen to them.
Absolutely, and we definitely have some good ones lined up for the next few weeks too that we're going to be recording.
Yeah, the names that you've told me. Very excited to do the one this Wednesday, and then some of the people other people you've discussed. So yeah, no, it's always very humbling to hear the people who are willing to do the show, and it's very humbling to see people watch the show and listen to the show. So thanks to everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for everyone for sure. So no IndyCar race. They have, I think, four weeks off. There was an NASCAR race at Atlanta, and they did have some problems there with the track. And apparently they haven't paved that track for at least 20 years.
Yeah, I didn't know when the last time they did it was, which is very ironic considering the big announcement this week that they're going to do a repave and a reshape of the track. And
they got it, yeah.
And people, a lot of drivers especially, are not happy that these decisions were made without their input. And I don't blame them. I definitely think that the drivers, a cross section of drivers, should be asked their input, especially the ones that have a lot of experience. And I just think that if you would work together, you can improve the product. That's my opinion. Hey man, anybody can run their business however they want. Not for me to tell NASCAR and its drivers and SMI and ISC and all of them how to run the racetracks or that. But I just think that it would really help if they would get the drivers' input, because they're talking about narrowing that track by like 15 feet or something of that nature.
Yeah, make it big.
I don't know, man. I mean, the drivers are not happy about this. That's for sure.
And I hadn't really paid much attention to the track before, but I watched it today, and that track looks rough.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. But I don't know. Again, if they haven't paved it in that long, they don't have the harsh winters like we do here in the Midwest. But time takes a toll.
Absolutely. But Kurt Busch won the race. Definitely good to see him back in victory lane. He was able to beat his brother.
Yeah, I think he liked that. I think that is extra special when he can beat his brother.
And it's kind of adds a little bit of irony that they're selling that team. They just announced that a week ago. So will be interesting to see if Kurt ends up with Trackhouse next year. I mean, it would make sense to me if I was Trackhouse, I would want someone experienced like Kurt Busch, but I guess we'll just have to see what happens, and I guess who brings the money.
Yeah, I don't know. Of course, I don't know any of the business insides and outs on any of that. But if Monster Energy's tied in with Kurt Busch, along with Gearworks, and that, I mean, I believe that's who he won with today was the Gearworks sponsor.
Right. Yep.
I think that you got to do
Yeah.
everything you can to keep him there.
And he's experienced, and I mean, he's won a
Right.
championship, I believe, and he's won a lot of races. So definitely someone you'd want on your
Well,
team.
and he's definitely been a guy who's been through the wars. I mean, anybody that's followed him, knows a lot of his personal struggles with anger and those type of things. And it seems like he's kind of come out the other side of that, and is very appreciative for what he has today, and so many things like that. And it's good to see somebody be able to. I hate when people say that people grow or like he's growing, but like just that he's adapted and he's working on a better future for himself, and it seems like he's gotten there. And I don't know, it's just good for him, man.
For sure, and hopefully, he does race next year and many more years, and hopefully we'll see him doing the double again.
Yeah, and boy, isn't it a forgotten story, kind of how good a month he had?
Yeah.
I guess he did
Rookie
crash,
of the
David.
year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
David
he
did
crashed.
point out that he crashed, but
He ended up finishing top. I think
fourth,
top 5, right?
fourth, I think. I'm pretty positive fourth.
Yeah, so definitely really impressive. And that kind of brings me back to the whole Jimmy Johnson story. If he ends up doing the 500 next year, like there are some rumors that he wants to do it, I think he will definitely be a lot more competitive on the oval, and he has won on the oval.
Yeah, I mean, stock car and IndyCar are obviously different, but I think it will definitely be interesting to see how he does on an oval. I don't think Gateway is going to be a great indication of that. Gateway's its
Is he?
own
Jimmy's
beast.
not doing
I
Gateway.
think he's doing a test though.
Oh,
I
is
think
he?
I think they're doing a test to see if he might want to run it.
Oh
Same
yeah,
as
I did hear that. Yeah.
Grosjean. But maybe they're just doing a test. Maybe it has nothing to do with running that race, but
Oh, it does. I would almost guarantee it has something to do with trying to run in the 500.
But but that place is not easy to get around. I've seen a couple of IndyCar races there, and so I don't know. I mean, it's definitely looks a lot easier than I think it is to run.
Oh, for sure. But I think Jimmy and Romain both, if they both race in the 500, be great publicity for the sport.
I agree. I agree, and man, the TV ratings look like they've been good the last couple of races, and hopefully that's a trend that continues.
Hey, maybe they were listening to our Paul Page episode and took his advice.
Yes, maybe that the heads of IndyCar were sitting there going, "Boy, those guys there, they know what they're talking about."
I'll be waiting for that royalty check.
Right. Yeah, I'll be waiting a while, I think. But it's just good to see. We're talking about NASCAR. Some of the talk this week is might be problems with the new generation car and it's not safe. And I guess Blaney kind of clarified his comments a little more this weekend, although I didn't see exactly what he said. I will tell you this. I've knocked NASCAR a lot over the years. I don't see them ever putting the drivers in an unsafe race car. So, I just can't see them putting them in something. There's so much knowledge around that area, around NASCAR headquarters, around the teams. I have a really good feeling that they're going to get whatever problem they have straightened out.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely don't see any concern there. They got their stuff together now. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know how people, I shouldn't say overreact, but the way they act or react to things, I should say. But I think it's much ado about nothing in terms of it'll get fixed. It'll get worked out.
Oh, for sure. It definitely will. Well, I don't think there's really any other racing news that we left out. Is there anything big?
Well, the trucks ran Knoxville, and
Oh yeah, Donnie Schatz did that race, didn't he?
yeah, a lot of open wheel guys did that. I mean, I say a lot, like a handful of open wheel guys did it. Boy, did not get great reviews amongst the drivers. Did not get great reviews, at least social media fans. So I don't know. I think that's a 3-year contract, maybe, or at least a 2-year. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens going forward with that. I know they hard packed the track. They were fearing there might be some rain, and it got to be one lane on the bottom, and guys were just rooting each other out of the way. A lot of drivers discussing just there's no respect in that series amongst each other. Doesn't matter the track they run.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see kind of the fallout from this going forward, especially running on dirt. And then it looked to me like, and I was kind of tuning in and out. At one point, Tracy Hines, who runs Door Sport, he and one of the NASCAR officials were into it heavy. Something over, they get pulled down pit road as the green's coming back out, even though they just run a bunch of laps under yellow. So I don't know exactly what happened there, but I haven't seen Tracy that mad in a long time. So it seems to me like there was some maybe confusion on the rules on the part of the NASCAR.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, it was. I think there's a lot of questions coming out of that race that are going to have to be answered.
Right. And man, they're going to have to take those windshields. They're still running the windshields in the trucks, right, on the dirt.
Yeah, on the dirt, and yeah, the thing is, I assume the reason why they won't take them out is because it's a safety feature. You know, something flies up or something of that
Well,
nature.
they could put like the crate or whatever it's called.
Right. I think there's got to be some sort of compromise. Excuse me. It just seems like they're inflexible on that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure why. And I'm not saying that the dust had anything to do with how bad the race was. It didn't, but I just don't think having that windshield in there really helps at all.
Oh no, not at all.
So,
especially if you saw what happened in Bristol.
Right. No, I did see that, and you see it at Eldora as well. When they run Eldora, everybody jokes about they get the Swiffer out and have to Swiffer everything off, and so I don't know. I think there has to be some sort of compromise made there. If they're going to keep running, if they're going to keep insisting on running dirt, the cars they're not built to run on dirt. They're not allowing changes. I mean, these things, from what I understand, these trucks are the same, specifics as you would run on a speedway, but with
Mm-hmm.
dirt tires. So when you take that into account, they're not really made to run on dirt. I mean,
Right.
dirt race cars are
made to run on dirt.
made to run on dirt. At least the SRX cars, I believe, don't have the offset in them, which you can run offset in midget or sprint cars, something like that, but the different types of race cars.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the SRX car is actually more on center than it is offset. So I think that while I don't think they put on a great dirt race either, it's a better race, I feel.
Right. But speaking of SRX, I almost forgot. Marco Andretti got his first SRX win, his first win in a while.
Yeah, we were talking about the other day. I think that's the first win. All right, the other day we were talking about last night. I think that's the first win he's had since he got married. I think, which is now 5 years or something. I mean, I forget how long ago that is. Yeah, he was happy. The kid ran second, Finhouse, the local hero. He put on a great show. Stewart was great during the race. Paul Tracy. Paul Tracy gets in a lot of accidents. Seems to be something that's followed him through his career.
But your girl, I heard your girl caused one. Haley Deegan.
So Deegan, one of the things that she like retaliated on, I believe that Ernie Francis Jr., I think she retaliated on him one time thinking that he got into her when somebody else got into him and pushed him into her. But later on, her and Tracy got into it. He come down on her in 1 and 2. Later on, she did kind of one of her patented try to bump and runs, like that she likes to do on short tracks. She ended up running fourth. I believe she ran fourth.
Right.
So, I mean, honestly, Paul Tracy's hit everything in the SRX series. So, whatever. I mean, what's the big deal she runs into him? It's not like I'm sure he has it coming from something.
Oh, right. For sure.
I don't, Paul Tracy is really interesting to me because the guy's got great talent, but he just cannot stay away from that type of driving. I said, if you look through his entire career, it's been the same way. And he gets out and he kind of claims he's a victim, and well, not really, man. I mean, live by the sword, die by the sword,
Oh, for sure. But Roberto Guerrero, what a great guy.
Yeah.
Great interview. I think it's about 2 hours, so definitely great listen. He talks about 1992, the race. He talked about his really bad accident. He was in a coma for at least a week, I think 2 weeks, in 87, around there.
Yeah, it was testing at Speedway. I forget, like 87, something like that.
Right. So he talked, had some really good stories, talked a lot about a lot of that stuff, and it was, great talking to him. And like I talked about earlier, we have a Roberto Guerrero collection here with Race 92, which is a brand that I'm a part of, and Roberto was great with that. So if you like Roberto Guerrero, make sure you go to race92.com and buy a Roberto Guerrero shirt. We have, I believe, 4 different options. So great ones to pick from.
I really enjoyed it, and like I told him in the interview, I always considered him a hell of a driver. I mean, and for whatever reason, man, the racing guys didn't shine on him to win the 500. Even though you could put his first few years up against anybody's.
Oh man, like 2 or 3 second place finishes in a row.
I think it was like second, third, fourth, second, or something like that.
Right.
Second. I mean, great stats, great driver. Just for whatever reason, it was not in the cards for him to win Indy. He even in his last race or next to the last racer or whatever it was, he come in with a chance to win in the IRL days, and had his the pit stops there were just his Achilles heel. Didn't matter who he was with.
Right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and jump into the Roberto Guerrero interview. It's definitely a great listen, and hope everyone enjoys.
Yeah, please, hope everyone enjoys it, and thanks for listening.
Our guest today drove in Formula One and later drove an IndyCar. He was an IndyCar race winner starting in 15 Indy 500s and was a 1992 Indy 500 pole winner. We are joined by Roberto Guerrero. Hey, Roberto, how are you?
Hey, Aaron. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, Aaron. Hey, sorry. I've never done that. Hey, Roberto, how are you?
Very well. Thank you, Scott. And have we met, Scott?
We have not, but we have actually talked on the phone before. I had to send you something for Chuck Buckman.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And this was about 20 years ago. And Chuck asked me, I had a little small business. He asked me, hey, you ship stuff out of there, right? And I said, yeah. He goes, hey, can you take this and ship it to Roberto? So I had to call you to make sure I got you the right address or something. I forget why, but yeah. So we actually have talked.
Okay, that's good. And I was really mean. I'm sure I said, "Oh, I don't want any of that."
Oh yeah, you berated me. I was in tears.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. That's good.
Roberto, I think it's pretty safe to say that I don't know if anybody's ever got a story where you have ever said a mean thing to anyone.
Oh,
So
that's nice of you. That's nice of you. There may be a few. I don't know. Yeah.
I haven't heard them. I can tell you that. I've anybody I've ever met that has met you has always spoke very highly of you.
No, that's very nice.
As a person. So
thank you. That's nice.
And before we started this call, we were talking about our T-shirts and stuff, and I will say you're definitely one of the nicest guys in racing, because a lot of people probably wouldn't agree with that, or let alone be on the podcast. So I do appreciate it.
Oh, that's nice, Aaron. Thank you.
So you had a very long, very good, successful career. What got you into racing?
I was born in Colombia, South America, and my father was actually from Argentina, and but he obviously he met my mother from Colombia, and that's why he ended up staying there. And even though believe it or not, he was a cyclist. My father represented Argentina in the 1948 Olympic Games in London.
Oh, wow.
And then he became a professional. That was his living. He rode bicycles for a living. And when he came over to Colombia, cycling is very big in Colombia. And so he came first to race, and he met my mother, and he fell in love with my mother. He fell in love with the country, and then he ended up staying there, and he became the trainer for the Colombian team and so on. So that's what that. But funny enough, I would go riding with him when I was little and so on, but he never really pushed me for that, because he felt that there was maybe not very easy to make a good living off it or whatever. So he never really pushed me, and he said it was always too much work. So I don't blame him. It was so. But then he actually started from the time that I was 2 years old. He started racing karts in Colombia, and so I basically grew up watching my dad, helping my dad, going to all the races from the time that I was 2 years old, and it just became an obsession. And it was, I started racing karts myself at the age of 12, which by today's standards is actually very old. But in Colombia, they didn't have any junior classes or anything. The only class that they had was the one my dad was racing on. So it was obviously, the big go-karts and so on. And in fact, when I remember, even when I was 12, he even had to put some blocks of wood on the pedals so I can reach the pedals, because there weren't any such thing as junior karts. But then that's how it started. I started racing in karts in Colombia, and right from the beginning, it was just a total obsession. It was my passion.
Right. So, and we'll talk about this in a second. But I know when you were in British Formula 3, I think it was, Ayrton Senna was kind of a rival. Were there any names like that of people you rode karts with or raced against back then when you started?
No, I really was the first one from Colombia to make it race internationally. There were a couple of guys that raced like in the 24 hours of Daytona and so on, but I was really the first one. So all the people that I raced in karts, it was just other Colombian kids and Colombian kids and adults. I remember I told you my dad raced. So when I started racing myself, I raced against my dad. And when I finished high school, that's another long story, but when I finished high school, that I left Colombia, my dad continued racing karts, and believe it or not, he won he won the Colombian karting championship when he was 52 or something.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty cool. So so that's where it came from obviously from my father, and then the passion from starting in karts.
Right. So when you started racing karts, what was your end goal? Was your goal to race in Formula One? Was it to race in the Indy 500?
No, I mean, in Colombia, growing up in Colombia, you have to be honest. You didn't. I mean, you heard a little bit about the Indy 500, but they basically followed Formula One racing.
Right.
And funny enough, when I was growing up, Emerson Fittipaldi, he's from Brazil and obviously from Colombia. So even though it's a big continent, but the fact that he was from South America, I mean, he was my hero, and that was at the time when he was, when he won his 2 Formula One World Championships, and I believe it was 72 and 74. So I mean, I had pictures, posters of Emerson Fittipaldi all over my room and whatever. So my dream, and it was really very much a big dream, was to make it into Formula One.
Sure.
Yeah, you and we've talked to a couple of Brazilian racers. You're the first driver from Colombia, but the one thing that it's hard to understand in America that they pointed out was there's not a lot of sports over in that part of the world, and so you have soccer, and it sounds like cycling and some things like that, but it sounds like the eyes are, it's like when you start being successful, like people really can start noticing.
Yeah.
And so when you started being successful and it looked like you had the talent to do it, did you get some help and support from like people in Colombia, or did people from other parts of the world, were they able to see you and say, boy, this kid's got some talent?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, the karting was all in Colombia, and funny enough, the deal that I had with my dad was because my dad at the time, remember he came, from Argentina, but he started with 2 other partners. He started a fiberglass business down there, and they built it into a really nice building. But he was very, very busy all the time. And then he was still racing karts, and obviously all the races were on the weekend. So the deal that he did with me was that he would pay for all my karting, but I had to prepare all his chassis and the engines and whatever. So here you are, 13-year-old, and I remember in the back of the business, the fiberglass business, he had a little room that was where we kept the karts, and we worked on them I worked on them mainly. It was funny because, I mean, obviously I learned everything from him, but it was very funny. So, and I thought I got pretty good at it, doing the prep for the chassis and the engines and so on. And I remember I was all the way in the back of the business working there on, a 13-year-old, instead of being the usual things that 13-year-olds were doing, I was back there getting the cars ready for tomorrow's race, for Sunday's race. And then my dad would come from the business and he would say, "Oh, I think you're doing this wrong." And I would just lose it. So and he was so good. He would just walk away and not say anything. But most of the time he was probably right, but then it would make me mad. So that was a very, very special relationship that my father and I had. And that was the deal. And I loved it. I mean, remember that was the only thing that I ever wanted to do in life, was drive race cars. So that was a pretty cool start.
So then how does a young man who, has showed his talent, how do you get to Formula? I mean, how did that happen? How did you get over there?
Yeah, and that again, it was a long way around. And funny enough, when I finished high school, my father, remember I told you he was a cyclist from Argentina, but the one thing he always regretted, and he really is that he only went through primary school because his focus was in riding bicycles and whatever, and he dropped out of school, and as it happened, he became very successful at it. But that was the one thing he said, "Hey, I went through it." It says, I support all your karting and I support all your racing, but the first thing is school. I mean, you're not going to be like me. You're going to go to school. And for some reason, I don't know why and I never actually got the chance to ask him before he passed away, why he was so convinced in me going to school in Colombia. But anyway, when I finished high school, he had a friend of his from Argentina, actually, that they had both moved back to Colombia many years before, and he was living in New York. And so I actually, I convinced my dad to let me go to New York to learn English. And that was the first step, to learn English. And I was actually in New York, and I went to NYU, just taking English classes and so on for 5 months. But then you think about it, I would go and I would get very good basis for the English when I would go all day to NYU, and they had very good classes. But then I would ride the subway all the way back to Queens where my father's friend lived, and we would just speak Spanish, And so the English that I learned, was,
Well, I imagine
it is mainly practice where you learn.
I imagine the English they were using on those trains was a little different than the English that you were learning in class.
Probably too. That's
right.
where
you get that's where you get all the good English ads off the train.
Exactly.
So I wasn't practicing very much on the subway either, actually. But anyway, when it came down to at the end of the month, when I finished my English courses and so on, it was time to go back to school, to go back to university back in Colombia. And then I said to my dad, I said, why can't I just stay here in the States? The schools are so much better than in Colombia and whatever. And I kind of talked to him, and he finally says, okay, well, you can stay in the States going to school. And as soon as he hears that, I said, well, if I'm going to be able to stay here, why can't I go to England? So that was my way. And remember, in the back of my mind, England is kind of the heart of racing, and the majority of Formula One teams are based in England. So, and that Formula One was the only thing in my mind. And I wanted somehow to get to England somehow, because that was the next step, getting to England. And he actually agreed to it. Okay, you can go to England. And I enrolled myself into engineering school to start with, which was actually very interesting. I remember my English was pretty weak. And I would go to engineering school, and I remember my notes, I would have one word here and one word here. I couldn't understand a word what those professors or teachers were saying. And then I would go back with some of the classmates and copy all the notes and whatever. And I would go back to my dorm, and literally I would cry. I said, what the hell am I doing here? I could be racing cars in Colombia and whatever. And so the first 6 months were really hard. And then obviously, when you are forced, then obviously the English started getting better and the schooling getting better, and it ended up pretty cool. And remember, the only reason I was in England, because I remember how important schooling was to my father, was just to go to school. Racing, as far as he was concerned, there was nothing even in mind. But in my mind, obviously, that was so. What I did, while I was going to school, it was actually called automotive engineering. That's where I was going to school. And I was able to get work with the local British Leyland dealership. And I worked with them as a mechanic. I worked as a receptionist, as all the different roles that you would do in a dealership. And then with that money that I got, I enrolled myself in the Jim Russell racing school. And again, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how to go about it. I said, what the heck? What do I do? And it was actually, I went to school in the Midlands, just outside of Birmingham. And the closest track where they had the Jim Russell School was in Mallory Park. If you guys heard of Mallory Park, and it was a couple of hour drive from where I was living to Mallory Park. And so I would go drive 2 hours a day, and I remember I wasn't making a lot of money, so I didn't have much. And you could have done the Jim Russell School like in 2 or 3 days, if you had the money to do it. But I didn't have much money, so I would have to do, they called it lapping sessions. and I could do with the money that I would earn in 2 or 3 weeks. I could do one lapping session, and one lapping session was 8 laps around Mallory Park, which was less than a mile. So I would go drive 2 hours and do 8 laps, and then drive all the way back and go back to school and go back to work. So it took me forever to actually finish the Jim Russell School. And then when I finally did finish it, and then they did races within the Jim Russell School, and I enrolled myself in those, and I was lucky that I won 4, and I was second on the other race. I did 5 races with them, and then I decided at that time, I think I'm gonna let my dad know what I've been up to, because remember, as far as he was concerned, I was just going to school. And then when I told him, remember, the reason I got into racing was because of him. And he was so excited that he's the one that started helping me in Colombia. And remember, in Colombia, they never had anybody race, outside of Colombia, basically. And so we would tell the press, Roberto Guerrero just won races in England. And I mean, nobody knew what the Jim Russell School was. It was racing. The people watching were maybe a couple of the parents of the kids that were racing and whatever, but in Colombia that made big news. It was on the newspapers and all the TV and so on, and that allowed my father. He was able to get the sponsors back in Colombia for me to race in the UK. So all the sponsors that I had were from Colombia, and they didn't even sell anything in Europe, but they would get so much publicity back home that it was worth it to them, and that's kind of how the whole thing started from them. So it was pretty cool.
So was that your first time in an actual race car outside of driving karts?
Yeah, that was, I mean, when I left Colombia, I didn't even have a driver's license. In Colombia, you had to be, at the time, and I think this changed, but you have to be 18 to have a driver's license, which is kind of another side story to it. I actually had a driver's license that my father got for me since I was 14, because he had friends somewhere. So I was a little guy. I can imagine when I was 14 driving around Medellin, Colombia, where I was born. I said, how in the heck I got away with it? I would drive around and I never got in trouble. 14-year-olds that the license says that I was 18. So you can you used to be able to get away with stuff like that in Colombia. I don't really know anymore. So that was kind of the start. Yes. So the answer to your question, yes, I had never I had been driving since I was 14, but I never raced anything, of course.
And then, so from there, you went into, was it Formula 2 or was there a series before that?
I mean, that was kind of the start with the Jim Russell, and I was actually very fortunate. John Kirkpatrick, who he ended up owning the Jim Russell School, but he was the head instructor there, and he took a liking to me, and I was so blessed that he helped me so much. I mean, I ended up living in his house. This was now he was running the Jim Russell School in Snetterton, which Snetterton is in Norfolk on the east coast of England. So I moved up there, and he's the one that helped me, and there not only was Snetterton, but it was the factory for Van Diemen, the Formula 4 factory for Van Diemen. And so he helped me make all the connections. I met Ralph Furman and so on, and I was able to join in his Formula 4 team driving for Van Diemen, which was one of the best teams, and we were able, through my dad, to get the sponsors from Colombia. So that was the next step, and I raced one full year in the British Formula 3 championships, which I don't know if you guys know, but the British Formula 4 is the most competitive, the most unbelievable racing there. I mean, not only we had like 30 races a year, they had like 4 or 5 different championships. I mean, it was 1 million kids racing Formula 4, and it was crazy. They raced there with treaded tires. There was skinny tires, so which is I mean, it was the best learning that you could do. And we have 1 million people running all over each other all the time and so on. So I raced in in 2 of the British Formula 4 championships, and I won a couple of races, but I obviously there was a lot to learn, and funny enough, Ralph Herman from Van Diemen, he offered me to stay with him to be, the factory driver for him to race the following year, and so on. But my dreams were so big. In the same area in Norfolk, they had the Argo, Anglia Cars Formula 3 factory. And that was kind of the next step. And obviously, being in the area, I mean, I would go and visit with them. It was Joe Marquardt and Nick Jordan they were co-owners, and Nick Jordan was kind of the general manager. He was mechanic. He was a very small team. He was general manager, mechanic, truck driver. I mean, he did everything, and it was an Austrian Joe. I just forget his name. He is the one that designed the car, so it was a pretty cool team. And then obviously I had gotten to know them, and we were able to put a little bit of money together, and then I started driving for them instead of, which there were many things that you do in your career that you said, well, if I had done another year in Formula 4 and then maybe won the championships or something, then it would get me. I mean, Anglia Cars, they had never at the time won a single Formula 3 race. And funny enough, Stefan Johansson, he was driving in the European Formula 3 Championship for Argo. And so anyway, we were doing the British Formula 3 Championship with them, and the first year we didn't really do very well. I didn't win any races, but we built an incredible relationship between Nick Jordan and myself. I mean, we would jump in the little truck that we have with the Formula 3 in the back, and he and I would go testing somewhere in England or whatever, and so we built a really good relationship. And then by the second year, I did stay a second year with them. That's when, I mean, it's a long story, but that's when we ended up finishing second in the British Formula 3 Championships, by 2 points behind Stefan Johansson, that ended up winning the British Formula 3 Championship that year. And the British Formula 3 Championship was really is where all the Formula 1 teams really looked up to pick guys. I mean, that's where PK, I think he was a couple of years older than me. He came from there. A lot of the drivers came from the British Formula 3 scene. So I got noticed a little bit, and it was actually funny enough because Stefan Johansson ended up winning the championship, and Kenny Atchison, which is another really good driver from Ireland, and I ended up tied for second, 2 points behind Stefan. And the only reason that he won the championship, because it was basically Kenny Atchison and myself that were fighting the whole year. We won a lot of races, a lot of poles and stuff. And then the last 4 races of the year, Stefan was driving for Rolt. Rolt is a very well-known Formula 3 factory. Ron Tornak, the owner and designer of Rolt, they came up with the first ground effects. That was the time when the ground effects were pretty much in Formula 1, and all the other classes were starting to get them. And that was the first time that Tornak came up with a full ground effects Formula 3 car. The last 4 races of the year, Stefan just blew us off into the weeds, and that's why he made up all those points in the last 4 races that we ended up just 2 points behind them. So it was a pretty exciting championship. So that was the next big step. And before that, you want me to just continue with this story?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, keep going.
So from that, it came again. The next step would be either Formula 1, but I didn't really have any big offers in Formula 1 at the time and so on. But I got a really good offer in Formula 2, which the Formula 2 was the European Championship. And it was Willie Maurer. It was Maurer, the Maurer Formula 2 team that Stefan Wilkenhock had driven for them the previous year. So they were a pretty good Formula 2 team. Also, very small, and they were actually based. They built the cars in Bolton in the UK, and but it was it was. I'm just thinking of the designer. Gosh, I can't believe it's gonna go. It'll come to me, but the designer was unbelievable. He was really good. I mean, that was the most beautiful race car that I ever drove. Gustav Brunner. Gustav Brunner was the Austrian designer that designed the car, which he actually became a very, very well-known and really good Formula One designer after that. And so we had a really good car. I had my teammate was Eje Elk from Sweden, and he was in his second year of Formula 2. And so I was basically learning, even though I had learned a lot of the tracks in the UK, I never really raced in Europe very much. So I was learning a lot of the tracks and stuff, and I ended up finishing 7th in the championship. And funny enough, I won the race, which was in the UK, and I knew that track very well, at Thruxton, which was in the south of England, and I sat on the pole and I won that race. And funny enough, that track kind of suited my drive because it was my first Formula 4 race I won at Thruxton, my first Formula 3 race in Thruxton, and then my first and only Formula 2 race that I won at Thruxton too. So somehow I did very well on that track. And funny enough, was kind of similar to the Formula 4 eras that Willie Maurer from Maurer, they definitely wanted me to stay with them for a second year, which again, going back in retrospect, maybe I should have done that, and we had a good chance of maybe winning the championships and so on. But I had an offer to drive in Formula One, and that was really my only thing. It was with the Ensign team. And the Ensign team, again, was a very small team, but I didn't really care. I mean, the fact that I was offered to drive in Formula One, I mean, how could I say no to that? The Ensign team was actually best known. I drove for them in 1982, and in 1981, that's when Clay Regazzoni, if you folks remember the name Clay Regazzoni,
sure.
That's where he had the really bad accident where the brake pedal broke here at Long Beach after the long straightaway at Long Beach, and he had a really bad accident that he got paralyzed from that. So unfortunately, the best known thing for Ensign was the fact that Clay Regazzoni got paralyzed on their car. So it was kind of a very small team, but same thing again, very small team, very low finances and stuff. But Nigel Bennett was the designer, which he ended up also working for Penske. He was the main engineer for Penske. He won a lot of races. So there was a lot of potential, and the car was really very good too. But we had very, very little money. So it was very tough to compete. I mean, we would go to the races, and remember, we were racing against the big teams at the time were like usually Ferrari and Renault and whatever. And we would go to the Formula One races with the one, and at the time, Formula One now, you cannot have spare cars or, no many spare engines and whatever. Well, at that time, you could have all that, but we couldn't afford it. So we had the one car, and we had the one engine, the one Ford Cosworth in the car, and that was it. We would just pray that nothing would happen too, because if something happened, we would just have to go home. So it wasn't, and even, so we did reasonably well considering the money that we had. But it was, obviously we weren't winning Formula One races and by any means, and it was actually very hard qualifying for the races. I mean, now, you have 20 cars in Formula One, everybody qualifies. I mean, there we had sometimes you had 30, 31 cars trying to qualify for 24 spots in a Formula One race. So many of the races we didn't actually qualify. So that was a tough start, but I had achieved my dream. My dream was making it to Formula One, and it was pretty awesome. And I did drive for them for a second year. And funny enough, the team became in my first year, we had Ensign and Theodore Racing were two one-car teams. And then for the second year, which ended up being 1983, they joined forces and became a two-car team. And the owner of Theodore Racing was Teddy Yip. Teddy Yip, you remember the name Teddy Yip?
Sure. Oh yeah.
The Chinese millionaire, and funny enough, so they, even though the team remained in Ensign's factory and Nigel Bennett was still the designer, the name Teddy Yip had a little bit more money than Maurice Nunn, so the team became Theodore and it became a two-car team. So, and funny enough, and if I just mix it in a little bit, funny enough, Teddy, he owned the gambling rights for the Macau Island, which
I didn't know
the Macau Formula 3 race. So I actually ended up doing that, the Macau race, 4 years, because of Teddy Yip. And one of those years, funny enough, was when I was teammates with Senna. So I was always a couple of years ahead of Senna. So I was actually already driving for Teddy Yip in Formula One, and he always had me go race at the time, the first times that I raced, the first couple of years was Formula Atlantics, and then the Macau Formula 3 went to Formula 3. So obviously I raced. So it was Martin Brundle, Senna, and myself in the team, and we were actually driving in Senna's. He just won that year the British Formula 3 Championship. So he wasn't a superstar yet, but everybody knew. I mean, everything that he raced, he won. But we were with his team, and I remember he qualified on the pole, and I was second. And I remember being so mad. How can this little Brazilian kid from Brazil be? I'm already in Formula One. How can he be faster than me? And then in the race was the same. He won the race, and I finished second. And then after all these years, it wasn't too bad being second to Senna when he became such a superstar. So, but at the time I was pretty mad that this little guy from Brazil beat me. So that was it was very cool that we spent a whole week in Macau with Senna and got to know him really well, and he was a really, really awesome guy. I mean, that was very sad day when we lost him. So anyway, that was kind of the continuation into Formula One. And the second year we qualified well in a couple of places, but our reliability was really bad, so we didn't really have that many of good results. And it had gotten to the time that the fact of just being in Formula One had kind of worn out a little bit. Yeah, it was nice being in Formula One, but when you're running at the back of the pack, struggling to even qualify for the races, it got. And funny enough, that year when it was Theodore, we built an IndyCar for George Bignotti, who was, do you remember the name George Bignotti?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, so for him and Dan Cotter, they were actually Bignotti Cotter Racing. We built an IndyCar for them based on the chassis of the Formula One car. And I actually tested it at Elkhart Lake, and we tested really well. I mean, the car was pretty fun, and it was Tom Sneva was driving for Bignotti Cotter Racing, and so the idea was to race it at Indy. And I remember Sneva hated that car right from the first lap. He hated it. He just, I mean, I think they drove it a few times, a couple of days probably, and then they parked it. They never went, which in fact Tom Sneva ended up winning the Indy 500 that year in a March. So the Theodore racing didn't happen. But the funny thing is that what formed the relationship. And then by the end of the year, when Theodore Racing and Ensign, they ran out of money and sponsorship, and they had to close the doors. But that relationship that Dan Cotter and George Bignotti had done with Maurice Nunn, they offered him to engineer the IndyCar team in the States, since he didn't have the thing. And then Maurice is the one that told them, Mo Nunn told them that they should bring me as a driver. So that's how Maurice Nunn and I ended up moving to race IndyCars together. And I thought that I would be I would be in the States racing IndyCars maybe 2-3 years maximum, and go back to Formula One, but it never actually happened. And no, I mean, I had a wonderful career in IndyCars, and no regrets at all. But that's how the whole thing happened. So, and it was actually very funny because you guys remember the name George Bignotti. George Bignotti, he was all known. He would always say it, he was the winningest crew chief in IndyCars, because he won the Indy 500 7 times as a chief mechanic. So, and then it was really funny seeing, here comes Maurice Nunn coming from Formula One, and then working with George Bignotti. Oh my gosh, you see the fights that we had. You can imagine George Bignotti, I mean, as old school as you can imagine.
Yes.
When you have somebody who was working in Formula One. Oh my gosh, the fights that they would have. And I always had to be the arbitrary in the middle. Okay, no, you guys, we can try both things. We can work together. So it was actually very, very, very interesting.
George definitely had his ways.
He had his ways, and he wasn't going to have this guy from England come and tell him how to set up an IndyCar, you know. So,
right.
So it was very interesting. But we were lucky enough to finish second in my first year at Indy, and got Rookie of the Year and stuff. So that was cool, and that was basically the transition from Formula One into the IndyCar series. That I ended up racing a total of 18 years overall in IndyCars, which was pretty cool.
So was Indy in 1984 your first time on an oval?
Yeah. Well, we actually raced, the first race of the season was at Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
Phoenix, they 1 mile oval. So I got to drive at, and it was very interesting because it obviously very different, and
right.
But I pretty much immediately got a good liking to the ovals, and I don't think we did very, very well. It was funny enough with Phoenix that I hadn't really done very well any of the years until the year that I won it, which was in 1987. That was the third year that I was in IndyCars, and funny enough, that one, I don't know if you guys remember, that was the one that I had to start last, and I still won the race. I mean, it was unbelievable, that race. I could pass anywhere. I mean, it was the most amazing race. And all of a sudden, everybody would say, "Oh yeah, Roberto loves Phoenix." And before that, they had said, "Oh, he never likes Phoenix." So that's one funny when people tell me, "What's your favorite race?" And I always say it's the one where I win. It's pretty obvious. The tracks they all have the challenge in them. They're all pretty much the same. It's whenever you get your car working and it suits your driving style, and those are the ones that become favorites. So. I've done a lot of talking. That was pretty much.
Oh no, go ahead, man.
That's great.
That's what this show's for.
Okay, good. Yeah. So that was all the way up into my first year in IndyCar. So. No.
And you really hit the ground running. I mean, when you come to, especially to Indy, I mean, your first. It was what, second, third, fourth, and second, right? That was your first.
It was the first 4 years. Which I always said it was funny because they said, second, third, fourth, and second the first year. That I remember after the fourth year that I finished fourth. I can't believe it. I can't believe I finished fourth, and I was so mad. And then the dry spell came, and this one thing, and then I said I would have loved for a fourth place at any of those times after. So you kind of took it for granted, and then you realized a little later that it wasn't that easy to finish fourth at Indy, or second or third or whatever. So, but it was a fun place. It was Indianapolis was I mean that place is just so unbelievable. I mean there are impossible ways to describe it, and when you come from Europe and you only road racing, and you always say, "Oh, the ovals are so stupid. You just go round and round and round in circle." And then when you start doing it, you realize that it's just a whole different art. And I actually loved racing on ovals. And the one thing that I loved most of anything in my career was working with the engineers and setting up the cars. I mean, I would love it when we were just us testing any place, any Laguna Seca, anywhere where it was just, the engineer, and it was just our team for 3 days working on the car. I mean, that was the thing that I loved the most, going through all the different changes on the car and what worked, what didn't work, and whatever. That was that was my favorite part of racing, was actually working with that. And the reason that I said that is that on a road course, the setup of the car is a compromise because all the corners are different. So you can't have the car perfect at every corner. On an oval, your car has to be perfect, otherwise you're slow. You then have two equal corners, or Indianapolis. I always laughed about that one too, because they call Indianapolis an oval. And
right.
I said I was pretty good in math, and it looks like a rectangle to me. It doesn't look like an oval. And funny enough, it was. I mean, but you had four 90-degree corners that are in theory exactly the same, and you realize that those four corners. Oh my gosh, it was so difficult to get the car working around those stupid identical four corners. That how can it be so hard? And it was unbelievable. I mean, the changing conditions in Indianapolis. I mean, I remember, if you folks remember, we used to be at Indy the first year it was actually
almost a whole month.
Weeks.
Right.
5 weeks, because you would do the rookie orientation, and the other years for the whole month of May, that everybody calls the month of May, and it was crazy because I remember, in different times, is telling the guys, I said, whatever you do, don't touch the car, leave it, it's perfect. And then you go out the next day, you couldn't drive it. I said, what the hell happened? I said, the conditions are so changeable. And again, with just those four corners, you said, how can it be that it was so good last night and I can't drive it anymore? It was crazy. And you went through that, the ups and downs of the setup of the car every single day. It was pretty crazy. And that's why it was such a challenge.
One thing we've talked to some other drivers about, it always, and you've kind of talked about this, always seemed like there's a lot of road racers that come over to do the 500, and they're really fast. And I know we talked to Bruno Juncker, and he kind of agreed that, you kind of have to approach the 500 more like a road course than an actual oval, because the turns, each turn, like you said, is different. I mean, would you agree with that? That's
yeah, it's
like
different, but it's not, and it's true.
Right.
Yeah, it's it's crazy. I mean, for some reason, it seems like the hardest turn, and I think probably 90% of all drivers that have raced at India would agree that the hardest turn is turn one, and it's just because you think turns 1 and 3 would be very similar, because they're the ones after the longest straightaways, and I mean, sometimes, and I was saying, it's really, I mean, the wind was also that changed that track so much. So sometimes you had the wind going behind you into turn one, and then obviously the car doesn't want to turn because you have the wind pushing you. But then the problem, you turn back and then you go back into turn 3, and then you have all that wind hitting you in the nose. So the car all of a sudden, instead of not turning, is really loose. It gets really oversteering. So those were the challenges of that. So because of that, turn 1 and 3 with the wind, the changing, the difference in the wind direction, they were so different. I mean, completely different. And then turns 2 and 4, which were a little bit easier because you had scrubbed a little bit of speed in either turn 1 or turn 3, but those had their own personalities also too, depending on the winds, on the temperature, or whatever. I mean, the temperature was so critical. The temperature also. So again, that was the challenge of that track, is how changeable the conditions were.
Right. So 1984, obviously your first year at Indy. What was it like on race day? You know, those parade laps. I mean, were you were you more worried about, I guess, warming up the tires, or were you just kind of looking around like, wow, I can't believe? Because I mean, there's what 300.
Yeah.
What's the number, Scott? Like 300, 400,000 people.
Depends on who you talk to. Some people say 300,000. Some people say 500,000.
Yeah,
It's like 270 in the stands, and then you get like another 50 inside. So it's like 325, something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember those times. I don't know if they do that. They never say the official count.
Right.
But I mean, the people, if you remember, before they modified the golf course right there, that they made the infield really pretty. I'm sure you guys remember the snake pit and whatever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When the first few years,
Scott remembers that.
Oh, I remember it as a little kid. My dad worked for an IndyCar team, so I would go there on like qualifying weekends, and then just go walk and hang out down the snake pit. Like I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. And that's where you get your real education in life at, right there. You know.
It was scary. I mean, I remember after my first race in '84 that we were lucky enough to finish second, and then obviously getting out of that place was a nightmare and whatever. So Dan Cotter, which was one of the owners of the team, he had a suite on turn 4 on the front straightaway. So my wife and I we went up there, and oh my gosh, the stuff that you would see in the snake pit in the infield. They were burning mattresses and I mean, the stuff it was unbelievable. I mean, that was the craziest thing ever. And again, the numbers, nobody knew how many people were in the infield. I mean, they had hundreds of thousands of people in the infield, plus the grandstand being completely full. So the numbers, yeah, you said 400,000-500,000 people, and trying to get out of there, it felt like a million. So it was a crazy place, yeah.
Well, today guys just helicopter in and out, and they stay there on their bus. It's real nice now. Back then, you didn't do any of that.
No, the only cool thing is we would always get a police escort on race morning, so that was really cool. And the police guys that did the escorts, I don't know if you remember, Scott, they were crazy. When they were giving you an escort, they would stand on the seats of the bikes and whatever, and it was really cool. And everybody would just move out of the way for you.
Really? They did that. I know they do that on the parade. I didn't know they actually did that in real.
Even while they were while they were doing the police escort for us, they were crazy on the freeway, standing up on the seats of the bikes. It was pretty crazy. It was very interesting.
You know, now everybody stays at that hotel downtown. Which hotel is that? That one that they've always put all the stickers on there? And
JW Marriott?
Oh, the JW.
Yeah, where everybody stays at. And then I know a couple of people that go down there and try to jump in with the escort line. Because, you know, they leave out. People pay their money. Yeah. And they leave out to follow the thing, and I've known people who try to tag in behind those. So
I'm sure. Yeah, they would always do that. But remember that time we were saying we would spend the whole month there. So what we would do, we wouldn't stay in a hotel. We would get an apartment. So we would stay, and as it happened, after my second year there, we decided to actually buy a little place in Broad Ripple, which is a great area, and that's when we were starting to have kids. So it was so nice having your own little place instead of going to an apartment or a hotel, that they have their own lives and their own toys and whatever. And we were able to walk to the creek where they would feed the dogs and whatever. So we had a great time, and we ended up keeping that house for a long time. We actually would use it a lot. Most of the races being in the Midwest, we had a motorhome based out of the Indianapolis house. And with the 3 kids, it was really our first 2 boys that we would go. I mean, it was like a year-long vacation. We would, spend, if there were back-to-back races in the Midwest, we would just stay there and then drive to the races in the motorhome. It was really fun. It was like a year-long vacation, and it was funny because I remember I did a deal with Winnebago that they gave me. A really nice. It was the biggest, 37 foot. It was the biggest motorhome that they had and whatever. But the only thing was that they needed to paint a big Winnebago on the side, and they actually did a design of my race car on the whole side of the of the motorhome, and that's where it was. So I remember driving in the Midwest somewhere, going from there, and I'm right there filling up the motorhome, which, I mean, it was like like even with whatever price it was like $200-300 to fill up that thing. But I remember being somewhere in Michigan, just filling up the motorhome, and then a young kid would come in and he says, "Is he in there?" I said, "Yeah, but he doesn't want to be disturbed." So it's funny because they kind of assumed that there was no way that I was filling up my my motorhome, or that I would be driving it. So it was really cool. We would get a lot of people honking when we were going down the roads and whatever. So it was a pretty cool experience having that big RV with the big signage on the side. So it was a pretty cool. We had a few years that it was fun. Yeah.
I know there's some drivers now that they get deals with like private
plane and whatever. Yeah.
Well, no, like private plane charters.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they just fly private all the races. That would be nice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, we drove our motorhome from track to track, and we loved that. So that was fun. Great. Yeah.
When you and like so many times in auto racing, you had a lot of great days, but obviously you had one day that in a testing crash, Speedway, and that place gives and that place takes away sometimes. Absolutely. And you had a hard impact, and you got to forget 17 days basically, right? You were coma for what, 17 days or
yeah.
And but out of that, you were able to come back, and I have some experience with someone who's the extended family member who got injured in a race car, had a severe head injury, and it's like anybody can imagine that's a very tough thing to come back from, and kind of take people through that. Steve Alvey, obviously he's done so many amazing things for the IndyCar guys, and he stepped up and did something a little out of the ordinary, and helped keep the swelling under control as much as he could, and then you had to go through that recovery progress and kind of take us through that time of your life a little bit.
I mean, just really quick. I mean, Steve Alvey, he's the one that he saved my life. I mean, if it wasn't for Steve Alvey, I wouldn't be here. I mean, no question about it. And it was that, but it was one of those things. It was we had just won the race at Mid Ohio, and we were running second in the championship. I mean, with the races that we had left, I mean, we were pretty sure we were going to win the championship. I mean, there was no question about it. It was. But then here we are on top of the world. We just won Mid Ohio, and then we were one of the top teams. It was Goodyear tires that everybody was using at the time, and we were one of the top teams for doing the testing. So they had asked us if we would do some tire testing for them at Indianapolis. So it was September, and we 2 full days. I mean, we did like 1 million laps, 1 million tires. We went through the thing, and everything was perfect. And believe it or not, on the last lap of the second day, I go by start finish, and it was Morris Nunn was my engineer, and he said, "Okay, Roberto, we're done, bring it in." But when you're tire testing, you have to do exactly the same every lap, because when you come in, you check the tire pressures and temperatures and so on. So you have to do the same. So even though I was coming in that lap, I still was going through turn 1, 2, and 3 as fast as I could go. So we would have the right temperatures and pressures and so on. And that's going through turn 1 is one, and it ended up being, and that was the only way that we found out exactly what happened on that. It was actually the left camber block on the left wheel that broke, because I obviously hit with the right side of the car, and the only damage in the car was on the right, but the left wheel was laying down when I stopped. So that's how they knew that it was the little camber block that created the accident. I mean, obviously, so they tell me. I don't remember any of that, but and the freaky thing that it also was, it was the 1987 March which had pull rod suspension.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's going to remember the pull rods instead of the push rods, and the push rods that all of the cars became with push rods. I mean, I don't know, it had to do with that, but all the designs changed to that with the push rod, when you hit the wall, the wheel actually flew away, or that they did the tethers that held it in. But at the time, the pull rod was like a very strong piece of steel. That's what worked the suspension. So when I hit the wall, it acted as a pivot. And even though I didn't have any single broken bones, I mean, it was a reasonably minor accident, being that one, looking at the damage of the car and so on. But the wheel came over and got me on the head, and that's what did all the damage. If I had the kind of foam and stuff that they have, even later, a couple of years later for me, that they had around the helmets, nothing would have happened to me. The damage that it is was when the wheel came over, it pushed my head against the side of the car, and what they say, it compressed my brain, and that's what is called the axial whatever. I mean, I forget. I used to know the thing, but whatever the injury was, so it wasn't. I mean, again, I didn't have any broken bones, but when they took me to Methodist Hospital, the neurosurgeon in charge right there, he says, don't even bother with him. The pressure in his brain is so high. There's nothing we can do for him. He's basically done. And Steve Olvis, when he came in, and this is all stuff that I heard from Katie and from Steve Olby and whatever. They said, well, these guys are maybe a little bit different than the regular guy that they get to Methodist Hospital with a brain injury, that it was somebody, drunk driving a motorcycle or something. It says, so that's where Steve told him, he says, we need to give him a shot. And they came up with this medicine, whatever it was, and I forget the names.
Well, it's barbiturates.
Barbiturates.
Gave you a heavy dose of barbiturates, almost a lethal dose of barbiturates.
It's almost a lethal, and obviously he had to check with Katie, my wife, and said if it was okay. And he says that alone could kill me. He says that it would drop my blood pressure so much, and it did. So my blood pressure went to the floor and so on. But then that's basically what they did, and they injected me with all this. Normally when you have a bad hair injury, they drill your
to relieve pressure, yeah,
your heart to relieve the pressure. Well, this was so bad that they didn't even bother doing that. They just did it with the barbiturates thing, and thank goodness it ended up up working out okay. Now the thing with the being 17 days in a coma, I mean. I didn't have any pain. I was just having a nice little rest. My poor wife, she's the one that had to.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
She was pregnant with our second child. Believe it or not, she had our oldest son turned 2 while I was in a coma, and she was pregnant with our second child. So you can imagine, and then all the doctors. They had to give her the worst, because the chances is well, if he comes out of the coma when your new baby is born, he'll be the same. He'll have to learn to walk and talk again and whatever. And they had to prepare her really for the worst. So you can imagine being pregnant and hearing all this terrible prognosis to my recovery and so on. So you can imagine how hard it was for her. But they actually give her a lot of credit. I mean, they said she was by my bedside every single minute that I was in a coma, and with bringing our son and talking to me the whole time. And the doctor said that even though I don't remember her talking to me obviously, but they say many times with the head injuries, depending what their people don't even have anybody or whatever, and so they gave her a lot of credit for the recovery, being there with me and talking to me all the time and so on, and then again I was able to come out of it, and funny enough, when and coming out of the coma, it wasn't like like in the movies that
Right.
where am I,
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It was very, very progressive. So I don't even know when I came out of the coma. I mean, Katie would say, that I would start moving a little finger here or doing something or whatever. And then my parents were at the hospital from Colombia, and it was really sad that Katie tells me that which obviously I don't remember that either, that I didn't recognize them when I first saw him, which I can imagine how hard that was with my parents. And I guess Katie says that I did remember her, but I better have said that, otherwise I would be in big trouble if I didn't remember her.
Even
Right.
coming out of a coma, a good husband always remembers his wife.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I said. So
If he wants to have a happy life,
yes, he better remember me. Yeah. So anyway, that was, and then funny enough, I mean, the computer world wasn't really all that advanced right there, but there was a place in Indianapolis that they were working with computers with people that had head injuries, and it was all very new.
Was it Dr. Bracey?
Yeah,
Dr. Bracey.
I forget Dr. Bracey, and he was the other one that I mean, I give him so much credit for my recovery. It was incredible, and it's one of those that you say, well, if I hadn't done all the work that I did with Dr. Bracey on the recovery and whatever, how much better it would have been, or how much quicker. Obviously, nobody will know, because I did it, and I mean, I was with the programs that he designed on the computer and whatever, and then he would tell me, you have to. Yeah, and again, I don't remember exactly. My brain at the time was not very bright, not very sharp at the time, and so I don't remember who it was. But if he says, I mean, that's what Katie says, that he said, you have to do 4 hours a day. I mean, I would do the whole day. I mean, I just couldn't wait to do whatever he can to get better. So I worked really, really hard at those programs that he did, and thank goodness it all worked out very well. I was very blessed to come out of that one, looking at the overall picture. So
yeah, you made an amazing recovery, and Dr. Bracey with his groundbreaking work, and if you looked at it, and I've seen those programs.
And how do you know about Dr. Bracey?
So I know about him through Paige Jones.
Oh, okay, yeah, because he
Paige
went
got
through
hurt.
him
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
So when Paige got hurt, and those programs look. I mean, if you just walk up to them and look at them, it looks simple, but it's that repetitive movement and changing and just all that, everything he designed. You could see, at least my experience with Paige, watching him, you could see his progress, and he's another one that they didn't think that was going to survive, and today
and I'm funny enough with Paige, because obviously I know Parnelli very well, and
Sure.
Whatever. I mean, and again, he's very blessed to have survived, but I don't think he was as blessed as I was, because I think Paige still had.
He's had a great life.
Yeah.
He's had an amazing life, and he's married, and he's got 2 great kids, and he's got a great family, and but yeah, unfortunately for him, his cards were a little different, and he had some other problems too. When he was in the hospital, there was some thoughts that he may have had a stroke as well, and
really? Yeah.
some things like that.
More to it, yeah.
Yeah. So and I don't want to. That's not. That's just things I've heard. So, but so I mean, his recovery situation was different than yours. And,
yeah.
But he's had a great life. We're actually gonna have him on here later on this year. We're gonna. Have him on, and I just saw him at Parnelli's when they had that auction for all Parnelli's cars and that over
yeah,
at the Speedway. We got to go to dinner with Paige a few times and that. So
that was a great family. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it was. I mean, that's another example there. I was just very blessed that my recovery was so full and so quick. You know, it was. Which the one following that a little bit. I mean, I was behind. Unfortunately, we missed the last 4 races of the year, and that's where I said. I mean, and we still finished 4th in the championship without doing the last 4 races of the year. And with the races that we had coming, and we had a pretty good shot that we think there was a very good chance we could have won the championship, but obviously we'll never know. But that was obviously the end of the season, and it ended up being that exactly 4 months after my accident was the first time that I got behind the wheel of an IndyCar.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, pretty amazing when you think about it, with everything that went through. And I remember that. I mean, that was another day I will never ever forget my whole time.
Right.
I mean, because not only from my wife but from all the doctors, you hear so much about head injuries, and it's different if you break a bone, then you know what the recovery is going to be, and it's going to be 6 months or this or whatever. With head injuries, they're all so different that nobody really knows.
Right.
So I kept thinking, well, even though I feel exactly the same and I can do exactly the same, my worry was, what if I get behind the wheel and I won't be able to drive that car like I used to drive it before? I was so nervous, and we did the test. Vince Granatelli, who was the team owner, my team owner at the time, and he was based in Phoenix. So the first test what we did was at Firebird, which is the road course that they have in Phoenix. And I remember, I mean, being so nervous and got in the car. And the cool thing was that after a couple of laps, I mean, I got this big grin in my face that I'm still wearing, because I knew that everything was exactly the same. So that was a big relief. That was scary times, but
I bet.
pretty well. And then after that, which again was part of it, the first race that I did was obviously that year the first race was at Phoenix. And I remember talking to Steve Albee that, and I have to thank him for that, because he was under so much pressure that nobody really wanted me to come back and race so quickly. And Steve Albee is the one that stood by me and pressed that I was fine, that I was good enough to race. And lucky enough, I qualified second and finished second in my first race after the accident, which was pretty cool too. So that was a good day too. Yeah.
So when you have a bad wreck like that, I mean, do you ever second guess racing or think, about getting out of it, or is it just like in your blood and you just want to get back into a car as quick as possible?
Yeah, I mean, no, the only thing, that's why I worked so hard on those with Dr. Bracy.
Right.
So I mean, I couldn't wait to get back. That was still my life. It was the only thing that I wanted to do was drive race cars. And again, I just commented on how hard it was on my wife, and I mean how awesome as well that she never said, "Hey, buddy, you shouldn't race anymore." I mean, she knew that was our life, and she supported me 100%. So that was very cool too. Yeah, and I always say the good thing with that accident is that I hear from everybody how bad it was, but I don't know. Yeah, I never heard. I tell them that they made it all up. That I never really had that accident.
Right, and there's no video, and I'm guessing there's no video of it because it was tested.
Video,
right?
nothing, and I don't have any memory of it. So as far as I'm concerned, it never happened.
So your first race back was 1988, and what was the first race? It was Phoenix, right?
It was Phoenix, yeah,
Phoenix,
which was the first one, and I was, like I said, I was lucky enough to qualify second and finish second. Yeah, so we did very well. And unfortunately, things which is very interesting. That year, the Vince Granatelli racing team. He had just bought the team from Dan Cotter and Vince Granatelli, and he had bought the team the year before, '87, which is the year that I did so well and so bad. The one that I said the highest of the high and the highest of the lowest of the low. But we kept the team in Indianapolis. We were in the same team there, and then him being from Phoenix for 1988. He moved the team to Phoenix, and the problem was not only we lost a lot of the key people that we had, but the main person that we lost was Maurice Nunn. He didn't want to move to Phoenix, so here we are. We did well in at the first race in Phoenix, and we came Long Beach, and I mean, I think we were in the top 10, but we weren't our usual. We weren't, 87. I mean, we're always either on the pole or always fighting for all the races. We're doing very well, and then things, even though it started very well with the first race, they weren't quite so good. And then we go to Indianapolis, and I think we qualified in the top 10. I don't remember exactly where we qualified, but it wasn't anything spectacular. And 88 happened to be the first race that I hadn't finished that was my 5th year after racing at Indianapolis, and it was poor his soul, Scott Brayton, he spun right in front of me in turn 2 in the first lap, and that was it, a big accident. So that's the train that started saying 4th place would have been pretty good. We started a pretty bad ratch. After that, I think we went to Milwaukee, and we were doing pretty well in qualifying in practice, but I lost it in turn 2 and ended up with another head injury that I had to spend the night at the hospital right there, and so on. So anyway, one thing led to another. We didn't really have that great of a year the rest of the year. And then it's only natural. Then people say, well, Roberto is not the same driver that he was with before the accident, which is true when you see the results. But I kept saying, yeah, but remember, we lost Maurice Nunn. I mean, to me, Maurice Nunn was a magician. I mean, whoever drove for Maurice, they did unbelievably well. And so it was kind of one of those, but it was hard to explain, and that So you at that time you had to start fighting that I really wasn't the same driver since the accident, and even though you think you would have shown in the first race that I did, but anyway, whatever happens, I mean, I believe that I was the same driver. A lot of people didn't, and that's when my career kind of started going downhill a little bit, and even with Vince Granatelli, that we had such an amazing relationship. And I mean, with Vince Granatelli and I went through the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows with, that race at Indy that we had in our pocket. I mean, we had in 1987 race that we were leading the Indy 500 with two lap lead on second place. And we just had to do a splash of fuel in the last stop, and it ended up going away. So we had to suffer through all that we should have really won that race, and we didn't. And then later came out that we did win Phoenix, and we won Mid-Ohio, and again we were set for the championship, and then the accident happened. So the relationship that Vince and Marie Granatelli and our wife, it was unbelievable. The relationship that we still have. In fact, Vince and Marie are the godparents to our youngest daughter, and so on. So we still have an amazing relationship. And even with that relationship, and I told Vince, well, I don't blame you, because the results were not so good throughout the year, that he put, I think it was Alonso Senior for one of the last 4 races at Nazareth, when we were running in Nazareth, and he tried a couple of people that nobody did a lot better than I was doing, but I didn't. I mean, he felt really bad doing that, but I said, hey, I understand. It makes sense if the results aren't there, and You know, I mean, I thought I was the same, but I said I don't know for sure. So
Well, auto racing is a funny thing. When it's such a team sport, and I know everybody looks at the driver and they'll say, "Boy, that driver there, he's lost it," or "That guy
yeah,
there." And sometimes, if you're not paying attention or know so much what's going on behind the scenes, I
yeah.
mean, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vince actually built a state-of-the-art shop out in
Oh,
Phoenix.
he's
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a shop, what I call shop mahal. It was a beautiful
absolutely. I
shop.
was so beautiful,
Yeah.
unbelievable. I mean, yeah, it was,
And
yeah,
at the time, it was hard to get guys to move. Foyt can't get guys to move to Texas. It's these guys like staying around Indy or I guess North Carolina, and unfortunately, you lose key members,
yeah.
and this sports is so unlike hardly any other sport. It's so finicky that way that
Yeah, doesn't take
it
much, does it? And
that's it.
everything has to
Yeah,
click. I mean, you said
yeah,
obviously the driver is the one that takes the blame or the glory at the end of the
that's
race,
right.
but it's so many people that have to do their job behind it, and nobody sees it that way. And but it's funny enough, even Vince Granatelli, he had to do something because he wasn't. I mean, he
Right.
was still spending a lot of money. He didn't know
Sure.
why the results weren't there. So. And I
Yeah,
kept saying, well, remember we lost Morris. To me, that was the
right.
and he knew. I mean, the relationship that Morris known and Vince had was very not quite as much as as Big Notice, but it was they had a lot of get-togethers, but they loved each other at the same time. So they had a very cool relationship too. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
anyway,
I've never really ever met Vince. I know I've met Andy once or twice, but they're just big personalities, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's and it's just like you said. Sometimes those conflicts can be good, and sometimes they don't. They don't always work out either. It's just it's such a finicky deal, like I said before, and unfortunately for you, that like you said, that really kind of started this.
yeah.
You
And
start and you see it all the time, right? You start, you kind of start hunting rides, and you get a ride here and get a ride there, and
well, the next step actually was very interesting because yes, again, we didn't have a good year with Vince on that year, and then at the end of the following year is when Alfa Romeo came into the
hmm
picture, if you remember, and I
with
mean,
Alex
and so
Morales, right?
yeah,
And
with
Johnny Caples,
Johnny
yeah,
Caples, yeah,
yeah,
and the funny thing is talk about if Vince was nervous, I mean, you can imagine how nervous the Alfa Romeo people were. And
sure,
you should see the test. I mean, they flew me up to in Italy. I mean, the tests that they did on me in this hospital, all of. I mean, I was 10 days there, going to all kind of testing and unbelievable. I mean, and then everything turned out okay. I mean, my brain was still fine as far as all those doctors were concerned. Now, the next thing that was we went through all that. The next thing was. Uh, uh, Oh, actually, is that's going. I was confusing a little bit. That was to start driving for Alpha, which again was one of those with Alpha. If you remember, it was like you said with Johnny Caples and Johnny Caples. He had a great team, but he had never won any races. He hadn't done much and so on, and uh, and they had the March chassis that March built just for Alpha. You know, it was
hmm
so
oh
we
yeah,
only had that chassis and we only had that engine. Nobody else has that, so you never had anything to compare it again. And that first year was pretty bad. I mean, that engine was overweight. It was unreliable. I mean, it was so slow. I mean, everything was really, really bad. And so at the end of the year, the first part of the equation to take the blame was Johnny Caple's team. Oh, that
mm
team, they've never done anything. They're not good, so we need to change. We need to change the team. they never considered that maybe they needed to do a little something with the engine. And the problem with that is that with a big corporation like that, Alfa Romeo is so huge that, you know, you were competing with Ilmor, with Cosworth, that if they felt that they needed to make a change in 24 hours, they had the new piece that was being tested on the engine. I mean, with them, the person that designed that Conrad had to first admit that maybe that was his fault, that nobody would, and by the time it was a month later before the part was even considered to building. So there was no way you could. There was so much red tape with that's why they never developed. But in the first part is that they didn't admit they had a problem with the engine. It was all on the team. It was Alex Morales' team that had the problem. So they moved to, and this is where the other part was going to be. They moved to that he just passed away. They just won the Indy 500 with Emerson Fittipaldi. Gosh, I can't believe my brain is going crazy. Don't forget.
Pat Patrick. Pat Patrick.
Yeah. With Pat Patrick, with Morris Nunn as the engineer, who was more, and Morris again. He won the championship and he won the Indy 500 with Fittipaldi. And there again, it goes back the Morris Nunn side. So it's Morris Nunn with Pat Patrick. They just won the championship, but they stayed with March. So March built a new chassis now, a new chassis for the team that this was supposed to be really good. I mean, that second chassis that they built, oh my gosh, it was just as bad or worse than the first one. So I mean, we struggled like crazy, and I said, but they never considered that it could have been the engine. And again, it was the only team that had that engine and that chassis. So it was, and then halfway or 3/4 of the way in the season, they decided to finally buy a Lola, which was the main chassis that everybody was running. But then going back a little bit, there were still doubts about Roberto Guerrero, obviously. So before we started driving for Pat Patrick after Alex Morales, they tested me. And remember, Emerson had won the championship and into them. We tested with the Lola and I think it was Chevrolet engines that they won the championship with or whatever. We tested at Nashville road course right there, and I ended up going quite considerably faster than Emerson. That track that I'd never raced, I'd never been there before or whatever. So all of a sudden, oh yeah, so he must be okay if he can go faster than Emerson Fittipaldi, who just won everything. So all of a sudden, I must have been okay. But then the results still weren't there. So then that's it. So at the end of that second year, then that's when they brought Danny Sullivan in the car to do the last few races of the year. And Sullivan, he did. I mean, I think he did worse than I did in those races. And but there you go. It was, you know, it was. So first it was the team, then it was the chassis, then it was the driver, and then they gave up. That was it. And after that, they never, which was really a shame. I mean, when I first was contacted by them and they flew me to Italy and I saw the facilities, the capabilities they have. I mean, I thought we were going to be winning all the races in a couple of years. And again, that I believe the problem was all the red tape that they had, that they were never really able to use all the potential that they had. So that was a shame too. So that was.
Yeah, we talk about the bean counters on here every once in a while, and these big corporations, man, if you want to go racing, sometimes they got to kind of put that off to the side so nobody else has any access to it, and let the racing team run as itself, you know, because you get so much influence from the outside, it slows everything down. It's fast paced. It has to happen, like you said, it has to happen overnight.
And with a big corporation like that, it was just, there was no way. There was too much red tape. So So that was another another kind of downer in my career, which again, unfortunately, up to that accident, all these things that I still believe that it wasn't my fault, but all the circumstances kept pointing, hey, Roberto is not the same driver that he used to be, and that's the way it is. And then that's when Kenny Bernstein gave me that was the next revival of Roberto Guerrero's career was when I remember Kenny asked me to come. Jim Crawford was driving for him at the time, and he asked me to come do a test at Indianapolis with them, and it went really well. I mean, it was I think that was the first time that I had driven that the Buick Lola, and we had, not only did he have the Buick engine, but he had John Lewis was the designer of the Lola chassis, and he was our engineer. I mean, it was really good. So I remember, I mean, the first time that I drove that car, within a few laps, I think that's when we started breaking the records. I think in my first day or something, it was the first time that anybody had gone over 230 at Indy. So it went really well, and then that's when they signed me to drive at Indy. It was just at the moment, that was the only race that Bernstein was doing. So it was Jim Crawford and myself that ended up for the 92 race, which again was another one. I mean, that month at Indianapolis with that car, I mean, we were so much faster than anybody. It wasn't even funny. It was crazy. It was but the one thing that nobody knows either, it was very important for Buick to be on the pole. They really wanted the pole, and so they were working. I remember working with all the. I mean, at the time, a lot of the privateer teams that were running the Buick engine, they came up with the throttle slides on the V6s. I don't know if you remember that, and it gave it a lot of better response, but then it lost a little bit of the top end power. Oh, there's no way the Buick would do that. So we still had the one big monovalve and whatever. And funny enough, even though I was the fastest, anytime that I ran there that month of May, I was so much faster than anyone. That whole month of May, I don't think I was able to pass one car, because what happened was, I would catch everybody really fast, but then that car was very good when you could stay wide open.
That's right.
That's why it was so fast. As soon as I had to come off the gas and then to go through the corners, I would put my foot down and nothing would happen. I mean, it was so bad, and then I would start catching him. By the time I caught him up, we got to the end of the next straightaway. So even though we set the lap record and we were so much faster than anyone else, I mean, I was the only one, and I kept telling the guys, I said my only hope is, I'm gonna get such a big lead at the beginning of the race that hopefully they won't be able to catch me. So I don't know what's going to happen when I have to start passing back markers, and as it happened, that was part of the reason, in the parade laps, and again, really no excuses. But I remember all the people saying, "Oh, make sure that in the first couple of laps, don't do a lot of weaving so it looks really pretty. Everybody just stay on their place and whatever." And then I remember that month of May, usually in May, May is the average temperature 70 degrees, and that year we were struggling to get into the 40s. It was so cold that morning for that race.
Oh yeah, it was freezing.
Yeah, it was freezing. And then I remember saying, that's awesome, because we did so much of the testing in March, and I remember that we would be in the garage and we would only start running the car when it got above 40. So we had run a lot of testing on that. I said, this is perfect for us. This is great and whatever. But not only me, but the rest of the team, we forgot to say that when you're testing, you can take 2-3 laps to warm up the tires, and then they go, and then it's really good because you have a lot of downforce when it's cold and so on. We all forgot to say that at Indy you have to go from 0 to 100%, and that's what at the end of that that first lap that we were all supposed to stay nice and pretty. I mean, I touched the throttle and I was in shock. I mean, if I had been on ice, it would have been the same. That was so cold. And I said, oh my gosh, I have to start this race in one lap. And these tires are so cold. It's ridiculous. So that's when I started weaving and, using the throttle to warm up the rear tires and whatever. And all of a sudden on the back straightaway doing that, warming up the rear tires, all of a sudden the car turned sharp 90 degrees left and boom, went into the wall. And I remember sitting there. I remember this like it was yesterday. I said, okay, well, this is a really bad nightmare. I'm hoping I'm going to wake up here very soon.
Right, I bet.
But unfortunately, it wasn't a nightmare. I mean, can you imagine being on the pole at Indy with a new track record and whatever, and not being able to see the green flag? But as the race went on, I always said, well, I feel pretty bad, but at least I'm going to be able to play tennis tomorrow. There were 12 drivers that ended up at Methodist Hospital with all kinds of broken limbs and whatever. And it was just such a cold day that anytime there was a restart, there was a big accident in turn one. So it was just kind of one of those things that,
it was such a, it took everybody by surprise. Obviously, you were 3 mile an hour faster than I forget who was second. The first man to officially qualify over 230.
Nobody didn't. I mean, we were 232, and I think it was Cheever who was second, and he was
it was
the 20s. Nobody got into
29,
the 30s.
229 something. Yeah,
I still say, why did I come up? I mean, I swear it was just a little breather, but that wasn't that was enough not to be a little faster than the previous one. So it was pretty cool. And then, funny enough, when I came back to the pits after having my little accident, it was amazing because Kenny Burnson, before I had even talked to the press at all, he says, hey, you look after yourself. So he says, you can blame it at something broke and whatever, or say that you have to look after yourself. And I said, no, Kenny. I said, I mean, nothing's wrong with the car. Nothing broke. It's just that was my accident. I'm not going to blame the team or the mechanics or anybody for it. It was just, I was trying to warm up the tires and it happened. And apparently what happened was when you have the staggers, that one of them warmed up a little faster than the other and made the car turn sharp left or whatever it was. But I mean, I was good. In fact, I think I was more the other way always, that I always took the blame for everything. I mean, I remember driving for Alfa Romeo one year, and again, we weren't very fast, but we were still going probably 210 miles an hour and everything, was wide open. Then I remember going into turn 3, one of those years, and all of a sudden, I mean, I lost the car so fast and I hit the wall. Talk about bad accident. I mean, that one was one of the biggest hits that I had with the Alfa Romeo that one time. And here I am on the radio. I'm very sorry, guys. I don't know what happened, and so I'm obviously taking blame for the car. And then they found the rear wing halfway down the straightaway, so the rear wing had came off, and that's obviously what the accident was. But I was already, so I don't know. I always, instead of like a lot of the drivers do, I always blame it on something. I was a little bit too much the other way, that I always took blame for whatever happened. But that's just the way my personality is, I guess. So anyway, that was basically it. When I came back to the team, that Bernstein told me that, and there was no way I was going to do it. And so that was another bad thing, being. But the funny thing is that everybody thought that you would have won that race so easy, and nobody had a clue how difficult it was to pass. And I mean, with my car being so fast, I mean, I would have started catching people in 3 laps, and I couldn't pass anyone. So as it happened, I never got to find out what the race would have been like, but I wasn't looking forward to it. So
Right.
yeah, those
And
are the few things that people don't know.
right. I mean, you see today, I mean, there's a lot of guys like just this past May. I mean, obviously Dixon was super fast, and I mean, obviously he was nowhere in the race, and it's 500 miles, and a lot of people I don't think about. I mean, a lot. I mean, you obviously know this. You drove in 15 Indy 500s. A lot can happen in 500 miles.
Yeah, so it is. So that's why it's exciting. That's why they pay so money when you do win it, which was funny. I always said when people say, "Oh," because people think, a lot of people, "Oh, you did win Indy." I say, "Oh, no, not quite. I was close a few times," and I said I should have won it a couple of times, but I told them at the banquet that I should have won it, but they still gave me they gave me the prize money for second or third or whatever it was. So yeah, you have to be there. You have to cross the start finish line first to win it, and it never happened for us. So.
Yeah. And then you unfortunately had that moment at Speedway. Then you ended up driving for Kenny again the following year, a full-time deal, I believe.
Yeah. With and that was another one that was very tough also, because that was with the Budweiser,
Mm-hmm.
and that was another big. I mean, we had the best chassis, we had the best engine, we had John Travis, the engineer, and that was a bit of a mystery why we weren't more competitive than we were, and even with Bernstein at the end of that year, I think he brought Cheever in to do a couple of races. So unfortunately, I went through a lot of that at the end of my career, and again, nobody did any better than when they took me out of the car than what they did. But you it's hard to blame the team owners when you think you have all the elements there and you're not getting the results. I mean, and especially through what I went through in my accident, that it's once people get that in their head, it's very easy to just go back and say, yeah, Roberto is not the same. And I mean, maybe I wasn't. I mean, I don't know.
Let me ask you this, and that's what I was getting ready to ask you was, how do you, and obviously you're, I would imagine you are a really tough competitor. Like you're a really nice guy and all that, but at the end of the day, like all these guys, especially high level racers, are very competitive people.
Oh.
And how do you how do you work with that when all of a sudden people are starting to question you?
Well, I mean, there's only so much you can do. I mean,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I kept believing in myself, but then at the same time, that's why the rides started going away, and there wasn't much left, and so on. But hey, I think after being through the accident, it gave me a whole different perspective in life too. That I said, hey, I'm so blessed to still be here that I just I take it with a grain of salt. It's I was able to still race quite a few years after the accident, and how can I complain? I have a beautiful family and everything is great. What's there to complain? No, it really, I mean, like in all those years in the ladder, I said, well, if I'd done this, I could have this, and the same with Formula One, and you could have been much better, and you can, but very easily I could not be here at all, and that's what really is all about. And so, I always was good at looking the positive side of things, and I still seem to be that way, and I'm happy with that. That's all good.
Yeah, you and a lot of people forget this. You had one more shot at winning that race, and with Pagan.
That's right.
And again, it was just another crazy. You always had like these little weird things happen to you at Indy, that weren't necessarily your fault. And you just,
I know. And it's it's funny enough that you remember that one, Scott, because a lot of people
they remember the crash at the end.
that's,
They remember the crash at the end. They don't
yeah,
remember that you were leading the race,
yeah.
before that.
Well, and I mean that again, that was, we led the most laps.
Right.
So we had the fastest car. I mean, we had everybody covered. We were doing really well. And what happened, one of the stops, something happened with the nozzle for fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And they sprayed fuel all over the car, and the car caught on fire. And then I remember everybody, get out. And I didn't want to get out of there because so eventually I unbuckled myself and get out. And then they put the fire, okay, get back in. So I remember I go back in, and I mean, I didn't even have my seat belts done properly. And thinking back, is that I can't believe I was driving that and my seat belts weren't, I can't remember if it was the cross belt or something. It wasn't that. And then we went out and we were still going. Oh yeah, the other thing that we said with the Hassel, we obviously didn't get a chance to connect my radio. So we were doing however many laps it was without a radio. And then I remember at the end we were, well, I think we were running fifth, I think.
Fourth or fifth, yeah.
It wouldn't have made any difference as it happened. I had that huge accident in turn 4 in the last lap. And I could have been in second gear paddling around. I still would have finished second. I mean, the race was all done, but I didn't know. So I was trying to pass whoever. We didn't have radios. I was trying to pass whoever was next to me, and I got a good run at them. And I think with the air from other people, it just took the downforce of my car, and I ended up losing it. And I remember feeling really bad for San Pedri, that he got hurt pretty bad, and obviously it was all my fault. That it felt so useless, so stupid when I didn't really need to be racing anyone at the time. But again, I mean, nobody knows that I didn't have a radio or anything, and I didn't know what position I was in. I thought I had a chance of making up a couple of places in the last corner. Why not? And unfortunately it didn't work out so well. But
right,
yeah, and that one was another one that we really, if we hadn't been for that fire, I mean, we had a really good shot of winning at that time. So
oh yeah, that again, that final pit stop and
that final pit stop again.
And then you had that and unfortunately you had that big crash in Vegas.
Oh yeah.
And which, I mean, thankfully you walked away from that. Okay, I mean that was a big crash.
Yeah, that was, believe it or not, that was the most spectacular accident that I had in my whole career, because I've never really put a car on my head before. I've never put on my head, and that one was on my head many times. And again, the other thing that happened with that one was and it's funny because I had that accident that when I do talks, I always start with that and show it. And I basically explain, because it was, I had an in-car camera and it was 4 laps to go. And it was actually Marco Greco, believe it or not, who was in third. And I was running fourth, and it was 4 laps to go. And I was just going to pass him. I was passing them. And you know that you get really close to them and then you pull out in the last minute. Well, I did that coming out of turn 2, and unfortunately he ran out of fuel. And when you run out of fuel with those, it's like stepping on the brake. So I veered to the left as quickly as I could, but then that's where I hit my right front tire to his left rear, and that's why the car went kind of flying up in the air. And I remember seeing with the in-car camera, you still see me steering when I was.
Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful moon, but I don't think I'm supposed to be looking at the moon right now. It's a night race. But I was so lucky that I never hit anything solid. I did a lot of cartwheels, ba-boom, 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 and then all the pieces kept falling off, and it just kind of took away the energy. And normally with any of those accidents, you you have a sore neck for a few days and whatever. I mean, again, I played tennis the next day. I didn't have anything. It was like nothing happened. And that chassis, even though all the pieces went away, 2 weeks later we were testing with that car. So it was very spectacular, but it didn't do a lot of damage.
You and unfortunately you ran for what, like another kind of hit and miss for another 2-3 years after that, and then your career kind of come to an end. At least IndyCars. Did you run much of anything after the last time you tried to qualify for the Speedway, or
no? The only thing I did after that was I did a little bit of off-road racing. I ended up doing, actually, which is another long story, but it's really crazy that I ended up doing the Baja 1000 7 times.
I don't know.
Wow, I didn't know it was 7 times.
Yeah.
I knew you did it. But...
And the first year that I did it was the year 2000, which was my career was definitely winding down, and it was funny. It was actually a neighbor from me. I never raced anything in the dirt before, nothing ever, and sometimes I would come up the road and see these weird looking cars on the side, and I said, what the heck? And anyway, he came over and introduced himself one time, and he says, I have these cars for the Baja 1000 and stuff. Would you like to race? And I said, sure. I've never done it, but I'll give it a shot. And the Baja 1000 on the year 2000 was called the Baja 2000. So it was almost, it ended up being like 1,800 miles or so. So it went all the way from Ensenada all the way to Cabo, going like that. So it was basically double the distance of what it was. And that's the first time that I did it. And I remember, in the Baja Peninsula in November, when the 1000 is, there are places that you have elevation that they have snow sometimes. So it could be cold. I remember being stuck in the silt somewhere at 1 o'clock in the morning, freezing my ass up and whatever, and then saying, what the hell am I doing here? Am I stupid or what? I will never ever do this race again. And then come November again the next year, hey Roberto, the 1000 is coming, you want to do it? Sure. So I ended up doing 7 times, and it was funny that I swear every single time that I did it, I would say it was the last time that I was doing it. So that was, talk about different experience. That was it was pretty cool. And the cool thing, the last 4 years that I did it, I actually did it with my son. So he was my oldest son. He was the co-driver, and he actually drove one part of the section. He drove with we ended up with Davy Jones. Remember Davy Jones?
Oh yeah.
He and I do a lot of work together, and I actually invited him to do that, and I actually had my son start with him. So we were in different teams because Davey had never done that, and my son was so good, and he has so much experience with those cars and whatever. So we ended up. I had my son start the race with Davey, and then the second part of the race was actually me and Saavedra. That he had never raced in the dirt either. So he and I were the second session of the second part of the race. Sebastian Saavedra, remember he raced.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So it was really fun. And then the cool thing about doing the 1000 is that you were miserable pretty much the whole time you were doing it, but then you had so many stories to talk about that you could talk about for them for the whole year. Oh, remember when we did, remember this, remember that. So it was quite an experience. It was. So
when Saverde raced Indy, you were like his driver coach, right? I remember you being around a lot.
Yes. I actually coached him in the Indy Lights, his last year of Indy Lights, and then in IndyCars when he did. Yeah, we had a good relationship. He's a really good kid, really good driver. It's too bad that you know how racing is, that sometimes it doesn't work out. So yeah, yeah, I enjoyed that, and it's funny because when people ask me, "Well, you going to Indy?" and I said, unless I have a role, I mean, I was never a very good spectator, and I mean, I feel like a fish out of water. I mean, that place
Right.
is really weird and I enjoyed it when I had a role, when I was coaching Saavedra or doing something, it was fun, but to just go there to watch is not very much
And I know
fun.
you came back a couple years ago for the Legends race
Oh
in
yeah, yeah,
July or August. And then
yeah,
you were talking about Davy Jones. I remember you were doing that Jaguar thing where
yeah. The
they were doing the
Jaguars.
test drives because I
Yes.
did it, but I did it with Alex Barron.
Oh, really? You did? Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. That was fun. And we did with Jaguar, we did a lot of the SBRA races that we would set
Right.
up an autocross and have people and drive it. It was really fun. Yeah. And then we would take people for hot laps, in a lunchtime or in between practices and whatever. So that was fun. It's too bad that that's kind of all gone away with the COVID thing. And funny enough, with Jaguar, they haven't really come back much at all. So I don't know. I don't know if they will. And we're hoping that they keep coming back with this kind of stuff again. That's kind of what I'm doing these days. I work a lot. It was 70-80% of the work that I did was with Jaguar doing promotional events and things like that. And then 20-30% with other manufacturers that I'm still doing a little bit. I'm doing a couple of programs with Lexus now and so on. And it's fun because you're still kind of associated with cars, and so
Right.
it's fun. Yeah, yeah. So it's all good. No complaints here. No complaints here. Yeah.
So, toward the end of our shows, I typically ask the question of a driver, but this one I think is going to be. I would assume although I've assumed some of the answers before, and I've been wrong. Seeing how your father had such a big part of your career, I would imagine he's probably the person you'd say. But I always ask, I always give a chance for the person who's talking to mention someone or speak to someone who had a huge role in their career, or that maybe the person that had the most pivotal role in their career, or maybe even someone who played a role in their career that people may not know about. It's kind of a wide open question, but
Yeah.
um,
I mean, no question about it. If it hadn't been for my father, there's no
right,
way I would have even been into racing or anything. And he was the most positive person you could ever imagine. I mean, as far as he was concerned, I could have won every single race that I did. I mean, he was an amazing person. So obviously, I mean that's number one for sure. And then after that, there were a lot of people that played. I mean, a big part when I first moved to the UK, John Kirkpatrick was a big part. That he's the one that told me what the next steps and who I should talk to and whatever. So that was big too. So I'm going into that. There really wasn't one, and
sure,
from then it was very critical. The Nick Jordan with Anglia cars, we had an incredible, and the results that we got with basically nothing was amazing. And then the next one in Formula One and then Indy cars that played a big part of my career was Maurice Nunn. I mean, he's the one. Not only he was my team owner in Formula One, but then he was my race engineer for so many years in Indy cars that I give him credit for a lot of the great results that we had. So does that answer your
oh
question?
yeah,
Because
no,
it wasn't
that's
one specific
yeah,
person, but those people that meant a
yeah,
lot to me. I mean, that I give a lot of credit to.
sure,
Yeah,
no, that's great, thank you.
yeah, sure.
So looking back at your career, is there one moment, maybe one win, maybe the 92 pole? Is there one thing that maybe kind of stands out to you as kind of like your favorite moment, or was it just kind of everything kind of together?
No question about it. I mean, that one there is, and that was my first IndyCar win at Phoenix,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of things that happened that should have been. We qualified, and that's when Vince Granatelli had just bought the team from Dan Cotter and Granatelli, or Dan Cotter at the time, and Morris was our engineer, and we had qualified third fastest. And then when they weighed the car, and checking the weight of the car, it was found 1.5 pounds under the weight limit. And obviously, working with Morris, he was always, the car was obviously underway, and we always balanced it according to whatever. Because Morris, he knew that one pound was going to make a big difference. So we were always right there. And the problem that happened is that when they, obviously you take it's without fuel, that when you weigh the cars, and when the mechanics took all the fuel out of the car before qualifying to ballast it right to the right line, knowing how much fuel we're going to use and how much fuel was going to be left in the tank and so on. Unfortunately, they didn't suck the whole tank out. There was 1 gallon left that they took up, and then Morris did his calculation, and unfortunately, after qualifying, they did get all the fuel out, and 1 gallon of methanol is 1.5 pounds, and that's what made the difference. So they disallowed our time, and we had to start last. And we started the race, and after the first, I think there was a yellow after maybe 10, 15 laps, and I couldn't believe how many people I had going. That car was such a dream that I could go anywhere. I could pass people on the outside, on the inside, anywhere. It was unbelievable. I can't even remember how far I was, but all of a sudden, after the first yellow flag, I said, maybe I had told Vince, I can't believe it, that wrecked our chance of winning the race and so on, and they said, no, you have to have faith, the car is really going to, but I said, yeah, but I never really believed them until the race started, and so we're doing really well. There was, in one of the stops, halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, one of the guys didn't pull the hose out quickly enough when I left, so I ran over the one of the gun hoses. So we got a stop and go. So here we go. We want to start last. We get a stop and go penalty, and then we still went out and did well. And we still, anytime with nobody what, I would just go and pass everyone. It was, and at the time it was, I think it was with Rahal and Mario Andretti that were, that we were running together. But I would pass them like they weren't even there. It was ridiculous how fast it was. And then after the race, they actually found, which goes to show it, just no matter what, that was going to be my day. I was going to win that race no matter what. They found Arie Luyendyk's mirror embedded in the radiator, in my radiator.
Oh, wow.
And it never leaked. Can you believe that? With a big whole mirror stuck in there. So I really should not have won that race, and I still did. So that's the one and it ended up being my first win. Funny enough, the last race of the previous year, which was in Miami Park, and we were on the pole, and we led every single lap until we ran out of fuel in the last lap, and we were able to manage to still finish second. So that wasn't, so this being my first IndyCar win, and being Vince Granatelli being from Phoenix, and it was just all the pieces. It was pretty special winning that race. So that one definitely takes number one in the best memories that I have of my career. That one was pretty cool.
Here's a question, and I forgot to ask a couple of other drivers. What was Michigan like the first time you were in Michigan? That has to be, intense, especially for a guy who didn't run a lot of ovals until he got to America.
It was crazy. It was, because I remember it was really bumpy, and it was so fast, and it was and then one vivid memory. I think I ran. I obviously never won it, but I ran pretty well. I always ran well there. One vivid memory, and I have a picture. I don't know where it is. It was in practice at Michigan. the Goodyear was having problems with the tires that were delaminating, and there's a picture of me going into turn one at Michigan with half the tire being flat like that. So it came off like that. That's what I said. Wow. So that was, but anyway, I mean, that's one of the memories that I have of Michigan and the races and stuff, being able to. I also remember when Derek Daly had his really bad accident. Derek got hurt really bad. He hurt his feet really bad, and at the time, with those cars, anytime you had an accident, I mean, a lot of broken feet and a lot of Rick Mears also. Remember, that was
same area.
San area. It was So yeah. Anyway, so that was a tough racetrack that I actually enjoyed. I ended up enjoying, all the ovals, and again, the thing that I enjoyed was working with the engineers and making the car work. Because when you, the one thing that in Indianapolis was the most typical one of them, that you say, well, how can it be so difficult when you have 4 90-degree corners, and it was that difficult. But when you had, like, I qualified like you there, and I qualified 15 times for that race. The easiest by a mile was the one that I set the record and was on the pole, because the car was so good. And then there were other times that the other ones that I qualified 23rd or something. That's when I was really earning my money. And Roberto didn't do very well this year. And that's when I drove my ass off to qualify 23rd, because the car was a handful. And that's a couple of those programs that we did with Jaguar or something at the Speedway. And I remember standing there on the brick of on the start finish, like on the line of brakes. What do you call it? On the
yard of bricks.
Yard of bricks. Sorry, the yard of bricks, and looking at turn one and saying, "I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore." I mean, you would come down when I was with that Buick, and you had the wind behind you going into turn one, and we saw speeds of 250 miles an hour going into turn one, and then having a conversation with your right foot. Baby, you can't come up. You have to stay down. You have to stay down. And then you do, and then you go and you pray that you make it on the other side of the corner. It was so intense. It was crazy. So it's it's one of those that, again, nobody. All the drivers do. All the drivers know how difficult Indianapolis is, but you would never be able to explain it to the normal person how difficult that place can be, and it is, and then at the same time how easy it was when your car was working well. As I always said, when I did the pole at Indy, I always told everyone, hey, my grandmother would have been able to put that car on the pole. It was so good.
Well, when you were just talking about Michigan and like Rick Mears' bad accident with his feet, and me and Scott were just talking about this before. Obviously, Rosenquist had that really bad accident. And where were they? I can't even think. Detroit. Yeah. And if that would have been, back in the 90s, that would he may have lost both of his feet, because obviously. Like how you guys sat in the cars back then, and I always thought this was amazing, like going to the museum and looking at the cars, your feet were like, what, like 2 feet from the end of the nose?
It was pretty crazy. But the funny thing is, because, when I coached Saavedra, I mean, he looked at some of my cars and says, oh my gosh, you were crazy. How can you even get in those cars? That was so crazy. And I said, those were the safest cars ever. Yeah, because they were. And the same with the Formula One cars. He said how crazy it was, but they were the safest cars. So he said, these cars that you're driving right now, in 20 years, we're going to say how crazy you are to be sitting in one of those cars. So he said, it's just, again, that's why, I mean, as far as we were concerned, we were in the safest cars, possible. I mean, that was the safest car that you could ever build. So, you have lots of confidence in that.
I always look at those cars and I think to myself, Oh, that's how a car is built when you let the engineer decide how the car is going to be built.
Really?
Because the engineer is going to do whatever it takes to go fast,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
just got to find somebody who's willing to drive it.
That's a good point. Yeah, you gotta just put hopefully a little driver you can put it in there that will weigh the
Right.
least, and yeah.
Yeah, like when Fabi and Andretti drove those Porsches.
I know that only they could drive
And
them.
only
Yeah,
they could drive, and they built all those cars special just for them.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty amazing. So it was a pretty cool career though. So it was fun bringing all the memories with you folks. Thank you. It was really nice.
No, thank you. And me personally, I always thought, I was when you come along, I was a teenager, and man, I always thought, man, this guy is a hell of a race car driver, and
No, that's nice. Thank you.
you were a hell of a race car driver till the last day you got out of one. So
Oh, thank you.
always been a big
Nice.
fan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Roberto, taking the time to talk to us. And once again, I do appreciate you allowing me to do the T-shirts that we were talking about. And I think a lot of people definitely enjoy that. And like I said, the name of the brand is Race 92, and I wanted to kind of incorporate the 90s because that's when I was born. And actually, I joke about it, but I was technically at the 1992 race because my mom was pregnant with me. She was at the race.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there you go.
And it's the one race.
Ages us a little bit, but that's it. Not much. That's good. Yeah.
Right. And it's the one race they always talk about because of how cold it was.
Yeah. And yes, and how many people ended up hurt. So anyway, yeah, that's good. And no, that's cool. I love the T-shirts, by the way. I mean, we have every once in a while we have my son-in-law. He comes out and oh, that's so cool. It's so nice seeing the kids wearing them. So we're definitely going to send you the sizes of the little ones, so they love wearing them too. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, that's nice.
Well, thank you so much, and also hats off to your wife, who, like all, the mothers and the wives of the racers, the drivers especially, their lives are not always easy, and she weathered some bad days, but hats off to her because she's.
Yeah, thank you. And she's.
Yeah.
I mean, it will be 38 years now that we married.
Congratulations!
And we were so blessed to find each other also, that would be another good story, that how we met and whatever. But we were very blessed to find each other. And we have three. I mean, they're not kids anymore. All of them have. We have six grandkids now, and they're all perfect. So we were very blessed. So I mean, my life is been, so blessed the whole time. I mean, I have no complaints whatsoever. So I'm very blessed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. Okay.